Hey, welcome back to the Zombie Tactics channel. Today, once again, we've got the ammo can. That means it's the Ammo Can of Worms series. This is part 3 in the series. We've taken a few things out of this ammo can before. It's seemingly bottomless and infinite in capacity. We've taken a look at what I'm going to call the shot glass of confusion and the egg of impact has come out of here before. And we're going to open up the can again today and take a few more things out of here to continue this discussion. Now, I know that in this caliber debate, or the great caliber debate, or the great caliber comparison, a number of you would prefer to, like, well, just get on with it. Tell us what's the best, or whatever. And I don't really do that on my channel. I like to give complete explanations of things, and I think that's important because, you know, the Bilderbergers and the Rothschilds, they don't want this kind of information available to the American public. I just was channeling Alex Jones there for a second. But no, really, I like to give complete information. I like you to have things to think about. Understanding the answer to something is better than just knowing the answer to something. And sometimes there isn't a clear answer, and that's the reason why I'm doing this series. And I guarantee you it's unlike anything you've ever seen on YouTube before in its completeness and its, I don't know, kind of irreverent approach. But let's go ahead and open up the ammo can and see what we've got today. Well, lo and behold, we've got the baggie of BS. We'll get to that in a second. And courtesy of an acquaintance of mine on Cal Guns, Joe Logic, we've got the envelope of reality. Let's go to the tabletop and see what's inside of those that's going to help us with this discussion today. Well, opening up the baggie of BS, I've got a number of things in here, and among the things that I've got in here are 3 handgun rounds. Let's kind of think I got the right ones here. I've got the 45, which we'll just put on the can there, and I've got a 40, I think I wrote it on here, yeah, 40 caliber round here that I'm going to stick on the table, and I've got a 9mm round in, I think that's a NATO spec round, the same kind that our troops would be using in the field. I'm going to reposition the camera a little bit so that we can get a better look at them. Well, there you have them, the 3 probably most popular and common handgun cartridge sizes in use today, the 45, the 40, and the 9mm. And I kind of called this one envelope the baggie of BS for an important reason, and that's because there's a common argument that people will use in comparing these 3 calibers, and it goes something like this. And I want to be clear, I'm not insulting people who have made videos like this, and I'm not trying to say they're stupid or they're ignorant or anything like that. I'm just saying they really haven't thought out the problem very well, and that's why I'm calling BS on it, and I'll explain why in just a second. And they'll say something like this. Well, you know, they'll put them all 3, or they'll put 2 of them on the table, and they'll say, well, there's the 45, there's the 40, and there's the 9. And as is pretty apparent, you know, here on the top of the ammo can, the 45 is a much larger, or it appears much larger, than the 40 or the 9mm. And they'll say, well, any questions? And it's like that's the entire argument that they'll use right there. Yep, absolutely, there you go. The 45 caliber cartridge is a larger round in diameter, and it's heavier, and the size of the cartridge itself is larger, so that must absolutely mean that it's the biggest, baddest, you know, nuclear Terminator cartridge on the planet, bar none, end of story, and that's as far as they'll go with it. Well, I'm sorry, if that's the case, then you have to explain a couple things. You have to explain why. Well, if it's the diameter of the cartridge, why is a 380, which is exactly the same diameter as a 9mm, markedly less powerful than the 9mm cartridge? And why is the 38, which has both a larger cartridge and almost an identical sized projectile, why is that generally considered to not have the same ballistic potential as a 9mm? If you're not answering those questions, then you really haven't said anything about your argument that, well, since this weighs more and it is greater in diameter, it's the bigger, badder cartridge. And some people will say, well, yeah, Zombie Tactics, but you only talked about part of that. You only talked about the diameter of the bullet and the size of the cartridge. You didn't talk about the weight of the bullet. Well, let's get into that while we're at it, too. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and set these back on the ammo can a little bit. And let's talk about some things more specifically. This is a 45 caliber projectile. That's the actual bullet that comes out of the end. That's the only part that's going to strike your bad guy. This is, let's put it over here with the 45. This is a 40 caliber bullet. It's going to be the thing that strikes the actual bad guy. Here's another 40 caliber bullet, the actual projectile that's going to strike the bad guy. That's a little different. Well, it weighs less is the biggest thing there. There's a 9mm full metal jacket cartridge of what might come out of a 9mm handgun. Well, you start comparing these and you go, well, yeah, look at that. There's the 40 and the 9mm. That 40 is bigger around. And, you know, you can kind of tell from my fingers, my ugly fingers up here, setting these rounds edge to edge, that the 45 is a bigger round, definitely. But, I mean, take a look at the scale here. No comments about the fingernails. I play guitar, you morons. You know, it's not that huge a difference to begin with. And the difference becomes even less when you start comparing it to the 40. So yeah, even though the weight still comes into play, the size of the cartridge is a lot closer in size than you might imagine. But we're still not really talking about the whole issue. You can't just say that that 45 caliber cartridge is markedly superior to this 9, or make those kinds of comparisons simply on the basis of the weight of the cartridge, or the diameter of the cartridge, or the size of the cartridge. And I'll kind of just show you why. This here, you know, most of you would say, well, by that argument, you'd say, well, I'd rather be hitting the bad guy with that than that any day of the week. Really? Well, let's just stick to the 9 and the 45 and take everything else off the table and do this comparison. There's the 45 and the 9, and you'd say, well, that's the man stopper there, and that thing there, that's only good for squirrels. Really? Well, what's that good for then? Because this round weighs roughly 1/4 of what that 45 caliber cartridge does, and look at the size difference in terms of diameter. Oh my gosh, it's not even close. Pretty much, this is 22. This is 22 caliber so far as its diameter is concerned, although that's not a 22 caliber cartridge. Well, what about this? What about this? This both weighs about as much as that 40 caliber handgun cartridge, but it's nowhere near the diameter of that 45 caliber cartridge. Are you saying you'd rather hit your bad guy with that than that? Well, in either one of those cases, you'd be a fool to say, well, I'd rather be fighting with that or that as opposed to either one of these cartridges. Why? Because that is a 223 or 5.56, if you want to call it that way, rifle cartridge. And this is a 308 rifle cartridge. And compared to any handgun cartridge that you want to mention within the range that we're talking about, either one of these rounds will completely rock your world compared to these handgun cartridges. Every competent authority will tell you that handguns are basically underpowered. They're barely enough to do the job. And so, clearly, the rifle rounds, which are smaller and weigh less, they're smaller in diameter and they weigh less, are going to do a much better job in terms of their ballistic potential and performance than these handgun rounds would do. Well, why is that? It's not the weight of the cartridge, it's not the diameter of the cartridge, something else is coming into play, and that is velocity. These things come out of cartridges that allow them to travel at speeds pretty much 3 times the speed or more of any handgun cartridge in the range that we're talking about. And that velocity imparts to it a huge difference in ballistic potential. So we can tell right off the bat that it's not just the weight and the diameter of the cartridge that's going to make a difference. Velocity is going to come into play. Now, the velocity on paper between common 9mm, 40 caliber, and 45 caliber rounds looks to be fairly insignificant because it's within a few hundred feet per second. Well, it looks that way anyway. If you take a look at the difference, though, between a typical 230 grain 45 caliber cartridge, it's maybe traveling 900 feet per second. 9mm might be traveling, I don't know, 1100, let's just say, feet per second or more, depending upon the rounds you buy. I'm kind of going with what I remember from NATO specs, because I think it's nice to compare apples to apples, a military 45 to a military 9mm. That difference in feet per second, that difference in speed, in velocity, doesn't sound like it amounts to that much of a difference, but it really does. And so just talking about, well, that's the bigger diameter, more weight cartridge, doesn't really say anything about which one of these is a better round in terms of its actual performance. We'll talk more about this as the Ammo Can series continues, and I hope you're all, got your thinking caps on as we continue this discussion. That's Zombie Tactics for today, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.